Esther drew in a steadying breath, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The golden doors of the throne room stood before her, towering and imposing, their intricate carvings glinting in the torchlight. Flanking the entrance were two formidable warriors, their muscled forms rigid with discipline, curved swords resting menacingly at their waists. Beyond those doors awaited King Xerxes, the ruler of the mighty Persian Empire, a man whose favor could elevate or destroy in an instant. He sat upon his grand throne, draped in robes of deep crimson and gold, his presence as overwhelming as the empire he commanded. Across his lap lay the golden scepter, a simple yet terrifying symbol of power, its mere extension deciding the fate of whoever dared to approach unbidden. The law was absolute. No one approached the king without being summoned, not even the queen. To do so was to invite death, unless the king chose to show mercy by extending his golden scepter. Yet here Esther stood, her pulse hammering in her ears like the beat of a war drum. Her people, the Jews, faced annihilation, caught in the web of a sinister plot designed to erase them from existence. She was their last hope, the only one who could stand between them and destruction. She swallowed hard, the weight of destiny pressing against her chest. If she failed, they would all die, including her. She took a step forward. The guards tensed, their hands drifting to the hilts of their swords. Another step. The murmurs of courtiers filled the grand hall, shocked whispers rippling through the assembly at her audacity. Another step. On the throne, King Xerxes fixed his gaze upon her, his expression unreadable. His fingers curled around the scepter, knuckles whitening. Would he raise it in mercy, or condemn her to death? Many years earlier, in the lively and crowded city of Susa, a young girl named Hadassah lived under the care of her cousin Mordecai. She was neither a princess nor a noble woman, just an ordinary Jewish girl, unnoticed by the powerful and wealthy. Yet, what she lacked in status, she made up for with something far more valuable. She possessed a heart full of kindness, a mind rich with wisdom, and a courage that would not waver, no matter the trial ahead. One day, the mighty King Xerxes declared a grand contest to find a new queen. His messengers spread the decree across the vast Persian Empire, reaching every province and city. The most beautiful young women from far and wide were chosen and brought to the royal palace. There, they were given the finest silks to wear, their skin was perfumed with the richest oils, and they underwent months of training in royal etiquette. They learned how to walk with grace, speak with elegance, and present themselves before the king. Each one dreamed of being the next queen, of wearing the royal crown and sitting beside the most powerful ruler in the world. Among them was a young Jewish girl named Hadassah, though here, she was known by her Persian name, Esther. Unlike the others, she had no noble title, no wealth, and no connections to the royal court. Yet, she possessed something far greater than outward beauty. There was a quiet dignity in her presence, a kindness that made people feel at ease, and a wisdom beyond her years. She did not try to impress or outshine the others, but something about her made her stand out effortlessly. When her turn came to stand before King Xerxes, the great hall fell silent. The king, who had seen countless women parade before him, paused. There was something different about this one. He saw it in her eyes, grace, intelligence, and a strength he could not quite explain. In that moment, he made his decision. After months of preparation, the day arrived. The entire palace gathered in anticipation. King Xerxes lifted the royal crown and placed it upon Esther's head, declaring her Queen of Persia. Applause echoed through the grand halls, and a feast was held in her honor. From an ordinary orphaned girl, she had risen to the most powerful position a woman could hold in the empire. Yet, beneath the golden crown and the royal robes, Esther carried a secret that no one in the palace knew. She was Jewish. Her true identity remained hidden, just as her cousin Mordecai had advised. For now, she would keep her past to herself, unaware that one day this secret would become the key to saving an entire nation. Meanwhile, in the grand halls of the king's court, a man named Haman steadily rose to power. He was wealthy, cunning, and ambitious, and soon he became the most trusted advisor to King Xerxes. With the king's favor, his influence spread like a shadow over the empire. But power was not enough for Haman. He craved absolute control. He wanted the people of Persia to recognize his greatness, to fear him, to bow before him as they did the king. Wherever he walked, nobles and commoners alike lowered their heads in submission, afraid to displease him. To those who refused, Haman showed no mercy. Yet there was one man who stood tall, unshaken by Haman's authority. Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused to bow. He was a loyal subject of the king, but his heart belonged to God alone. No amount of pressure, no threat, no law could make him bow before a man. Each time Haman passed through the palace gates and saw Mordecai standing firm, his pride burned with fury. At first, Haman's anger was directed only at Mordecai. But when he discovered that Mordecai was Jewish, his rage turned into something far more dangerous. Hatred took root in his heart, twisting his thoughts into a monstrous scheme. Destroying one man would not be enough. No, he would make Mordecai suffer in the worst way possible. He would wipe out all the Jewish people in Persia. Every man, woman, and child. He would erase their very existence from the empire. And so, Haman devised a terrible plan. He went to the king with carefully chosen words, playing on Xerxes' fear of rebellion. "There is a certain people scattered throughout your empire," he told the king. "They keep themselves separate. Their laws are different. They do not obey the king's commands. It is not in your best interest to let them live." Haman knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that if he made the Jews sound like a threat, the king would act swiftly. He tricked King Xerxes into signing a law that allowed the people of Persia to attack and kill every Jew, men, women, and children on a certain day. Once the king's seal was placed on the law, it could not be changed or taken back. And so, with honeyed words and a bribe of silver, he convinced Xerxes to issue a decree, a law allowing the people of Persia to rise up on a certain day and attack the Jews. Once the king's seal was placed on the decree, it was final. The law could not be undone. When the news spread, terror gripped the Jewish communities. Fear spread through the Jewish communities like wildfire. People cried out in sorrow. Families wept, knowing their days were numbered. They held each other tightly, afraid of what was to come. They knew their lives were in great danger, and no one could escape this fate. And Haman smiled, pleased with himself. He had set his plan in motion. He had ensured that Mordecai would not only die, but watch his entire people be destroyed. Or so he thought. But Mordecai sent a desperate message to Esther. "Go to the king. Beg him to save us." Esther's hands trembled as she read his words. Go to the king. That was dangerous, maybe even deadly. The law was clear. No one could approach the king without being invited, not even the queen. She hadn't seen him in a whole month. If she went to him without permission, he could have her put to death. But then Mordecai sent another message, and his words stayed with her. "Don't think that just because you live in the palace, you will be safe. If you say nothing, help will come from somewhere else, but you and your family will still be in danger. Who knows? Maybe you became queen for this very moment." Esther took a deep breath. She knew what she had to do. She would go to the king. But first, Esther called for a 3-day fast. No food, no water, only prayer. She needed strength and wisdom, and the Jewish people across the city joined her in fasting and seeking God's help. Now, the moment had come. She stood at the entrance of the throne room, one step away from life or death. The massive hall was silent. Every eye was on her. King Xerxes looked up. His gaze met hers. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then, he lifted the golden scepter. Relief rushed through Esther like a river. She had been spared. The king's voice rang through the hall. "What do you want, my queen? Even up to half my kingdom, it will be given to you." But Esther did not speak of the danger just yet. Instead, she bowed gracefully and made a simple request. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Haman, full of pride, believed he had gained the queen's favor. He left the palace that evening with a smug smile, certain that his power was greater than ever. But then, he saw Mordecai, still standing, still refusing to bow. Haman's joy twisted into rage. His hatred for Mordecai burned hotter than before. That night, he gave a wicked order. His servants would build a massive gallows, 50 feet high. At sunrise, he would ask the king to have Mordecai hanged. But that same night, something unexpected happened. The king couldn't sleep. He called for the royal records to be read to him. As the scribes turned the pages, they came across something shocking. Years ago, Mordecai had saved the king's life from an assassination plot. Yet, he had never been rewarded. Morning came, and Haman entered the palace, eager to demand Mordecai's death. Before he could speak, the king asked him, "What should be done for a man the king wishes to honor?" Haman's chest swelled with pride. Surely, the king was speaking about him. So, he described the grandest reward he could imagine, dressing the man in royal robes, placing him on the king's own horse, and leading him through the city in a magnificent parade while everyone cheered. The king smiled. "Excellent! Go and do all of this for Mordecai the Jew." Haman's face turned ghostly pale. Instead of executing Mordecai, he was now forced to dress him in royal robes, place him on the king's horse, and personally lead him through the streets, announcing to everyone that Mordecai was the one the king delighted to honor. That night, at the second banquet, King Xerxes turned to Esther once more. "What is your request, my queen?" he asked. "I will give you anything, even up to half my kingdom." Esther took a deep breath, steadying herself. The moment she had been preparing for had finally arrived. Every eye in the banquet hall was on her. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice strong but filled with urgency, "if I have found favor in your eyes, please spare my people. We have been sold to be killed, to be wiped out completely." A heavy silence fell over the room. The king's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as he processed her words. His hands curled into fists. The idea that someone had dared to threaten the queen and her people filled him with fury. Who would do such a thing? He demanded, his voice thunderous. Who would dare to harm my queen's people? Esther did not hesitate. She turned and pointed across the table. "This vile enemy, Haman." A gasp rippled through the banquet hall. All heads turned toward Haman. Haman's face drained of color. His usual arrogance vanished in an instant. His body trembled, and he could feel the weight of his own downfall pressing upon him. The very scheme he had so carefully planned was now unraveling before his eyes. The tension in the room erupted into chaos. Servants whispered in shock. Courtiers stepped back, as if distancing themselves from Haman would save them from his fate. King Xerxes rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. His fury was uncontrollable. Without a word, he turned and stormed out into the palace garden, needing space to think. How had he been so blind? How had he allowed himself to be deceived into ordering the destruction of an entire people, his queen's people? Haman knew there was no escape. He was doomed. In sheer desperation, he fell to his knees before Esther, reaching for her robes, pleading for his life. His voice was frantic, shaking with terror. "Please, your Majesty, have mercy. Spare me." But at that very moment, the king re-entered the room. His gaze fell on Haman, now grasping at Esther in desperation. His fury ignited even further. "Guards!" The king roared. The command was instant. The palace guards rushed forward, seizing Haman by the arms. He struggled, but it was useless. One of the king's attendants stepped forward and spoke. "Your Majesty." Haman had gallows built, 50 feet high, intended for Mordecai. The king's eyes flashed with decision. "Then let him be hanged on it instead." That very night, Haman was taken away. The same gallows he had built to destroy an innocent man became the instrument of his own downfall. Justice had been served, but the danger wasn't over. The king's law allowing the attack on the Jews could not be undone. The order was still in place. Esther and Mordecai had to come up with a plan quickly. A new decree was written. The Jews were no longer helpless. Now, they had the right to defend themselves against anyone who tried to harm them. The tables had turned. When the day of the attack arrived, the Jewish people stood together, ready to fight for their lives. With strength, unity, and faith, they overcame their enemies. What was meant for their destruction became their victory. The fear that had once gripped them was replaced with joy and celebration. Mordecai was honored by the king and made his most trusted advisor, taking Haman's place. He used his new power to ensure that justice and peace remained in the kingdom. Esther, once an ordinary girl, had become the savior of her people. Her courage and wisdom had saved an entire nation. To this day, the Jewish people remember this great victory with a festival called Purim, a time of joy, feasting, and thanksgiving for how Esther's bravery and God's protection turned a time of sorrow into one of triumph. The story of Esther teaches us, courage means doing the right thing, even when you're afraid. Esther risked her life to save others, proving that true bravery isn't the absence of fear but the willingness to act despite it. Sometimes, we are placed in a special position for such a time as this. Esther didn't know why she became queen, but when the moment came, she realized it was for a greater purpose. Likewise, each of us has moments where we are called to make a difference. Faith and wisdom, not just strength, can change history. Esther didn't fight with weapons. She used wisdom, patience, and faith. And through them, she achieved what seemed impossible. So, whenever you face a challenge, remember Esther. You, too, can stand up for what is right, even if you're afraid, even if the odds are against you. Because courage, true courage, changes everything.